It should be a big zechut for you and for your family that you're coming straight back to learn Torah right after a surgery. Okay, alamak. Let's get cracking. We're up to the last piece of the Gemara, right before the Mishnah, where the Mishnah tells us exactly this point. The Mishnah says, we've been talking about the kavod that a person has for a bet knesset. We are on 29, Daf Chavtet Amud Aleph, 29a3. Tanu Rabbanan. Are there other places, the Gemara is wondering, that also have an element of holiness? Says the Gemara, Bet HaKvarot, and noagin bahen kalut rosh. If a person has or is involved in a bet hakvarot, they go to a cemetery. The halacha is en noagin. We do not behave in such a place with kalut rosh, with lightness, a light head. We're not taking it lightly that we're there. So what does that mean, not to take it lightly? En marinot bahen behema. You can't walk around having your animals graze on this very peaceful piece of land, i.e. the cemetery. Then molichim bahem amat hamayim, and you do not have a river stream run through the cemetery, just thinking to yourself, you know what, the river's over here, my house is over here, have the water come straight through, it's going to be great, I'm going to have the amat hamayim come through. Says the Gemara, you can't do that. Then melaktim bahen asavim, you're not allowed to gather the asavim, the grass. You can't pull out the grass in the cemetery. Vimliket, and if you gather the grass in the cemetery, sorfan b'makom, you have to burn them on the spot. Now the Braita ends and says, for the sake of the honor of the metim. Now the Gemara is going to challenge that, and we'll go back to this in just a second. What does it mean for the sake of the honor of the metim? The Gemara says, ahai, is that last sentence, because of the honor of the metim, is that going back on the last thing we just said, i.e., the last thing which was picking up the grass and you have to burn the grass if you did, or is it going back on that which was said before? If you say it's going on the end, if you're going to burn them publicly to illustrate, guys, I pulled out this grass, but I just want everybody here to know, without a shadow of a doubt, this grass was not picked for me to give to my animals. I just picked it up out of the grass. Look, I'm burning it now. I'm not using it for anything else. That would be kavod for the metim, because everyone would see that your earlier picking of the grass was not for personal gain. It was actually for whatever other reason. However, if you're going to burn it privately, which the Mishnah seems to indicate by not mandating burning it publicly, okay? So therefore, that's not mepnei kavod hametim. The Gemara says there's no my kavod metimika. Ela, says the Gemara, aresha. What is it talking about? It's talking about the beginning of the Braita, which the beginning of the Braita says we do not behave in a place of a cemetery, which is makom. We do not behave in a way which is kalut rosh, which is a lightheaded, levity, not acting with the proper gravitas towards that place. Now, I just want to point out before we move on from this, it's very interesting, because one of the customs when a person goes to a cemetery this is a custom in many communities, is that they rip out grass. So here we have a Braita telling us you're not allowed to rip out the grass. And what's the custom evolved in those communities? They rip out grass and you throw it over your shoulder. Yeah, here we go. Yossi knows. So my friends, so how can it be that we're specifically doing something that the Braita tells us not to do?
We don't hold by it.
So one way of understanding is that Braita is no shelo k'halacha. But as we've seen many times already before, the Gemara always tries to make every Braita and Mishnah go aliba de hilchata. We don't want to say that this Braita is not the halakha. So is there a case in which the Braita could fit with the halakha? So let's take a look one more time. What's the reason why we're burning the grass? In order to illustrate that I'm not using it for my animals. So maybe the reason why the custom evolved to tear out the grass and throw it over your shoulder is to illustrate immediately, this is a holy place. Look, I'm tearing out the grass and I can't use it for anything else. So it achieves the concept of sorfan by throwing them immediately away over your shoulder, by illustrating that you cannot use this for anything else because it's a holy place. It's a place which needs to be treated with respect. So that, if we understand the Braita that way, then perhaps that would be the explanation for that minhag. Let's come back now to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is now going to discuss the 4 different parashiot, the parashiot that are read in the Bet Knesset in almost successive weeks. And what are these 4 parashiot? Says the Mishnah, Rosh Chodesh Adar shechal liot b'Shabbat. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbat, Korin beparashat shekalim. You read shekalim, right? When do you read it? On the Shabbat. Chal liyot b'toch Shabbat. What if Rosh Chodesh fell out on middle of the week? Makdimin l'she'avar. We go back 1 week to beforehand. Why? Because the halacha is that we collect the money for the machatzit shekel when? From Rosh Chodesh Adar. So therefore, if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on Shabbat, the earliest time that you could collect the shekalim is going to be Sunday. So therefore, reading it on Shabbat is enough of a reminder to get everyone in the zone beforehand. Now, what we're talking about today, what we do today is not machatzit shekel, it's zecher machatzit shekel. But we do the zecher machatzit shekel in the same way that we would have done it back then, because it's commemorating actually that practice. So my friends, let's go back and understand this. We read Parashat Shekalim on the week of Shabbat, on the day of Shabbat, if Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat. If let's say it's the middle of the week, so to read it on Shabbat, that would be already too late. We're already into Rosh Chodesh Adar. So then, Makdimin l'Shavar, you go back 1 week to the Shabbat beforehand to read Parashat Shekalim. That's where the Torah tells you about the obligation everyone has to give a half a shekel. And then we pause for 1 week, and then we read the next parasha. And what's the next parasha? Bashniya Zachor. Now, just to be clear, in this scenario, we just discussed 2 cases. We said, if it falls out on Shabbat, and we talked about if it falls out on during the week. 1 case was where we read it on that day. 1 case we go Shabbat earlier. What does the Mishnah over here mean when it says we wait 1 Shabbat? The commentators point out, if it actually talks about when we read it on Shabbat, it will turn out that Purim falls out on the night of, right before the second Shabbat. So in that case, we'll be reading actually the next parasha, right, without a pause of a Shabbat. So what does it mean that we wait 1 Shabbat? That's going on the other case in the Mishnah where you were makdimin, where you pulled it back 1 extra week. Then you read Parashat Zachor on a break of 1 week. You wait 1 week. In some scenarios, you'll actually read Parashat Zachor, Shekalim, and Parashat Zachor back to back. So mafsikin the Shabbat acheret is only talking about in the case when you pulled it back 1 week. Bashniya, in the second of the 4 weeks. This does not mean the second week. How do we know it doesn't mean the second week? Because the Mishnah says first one, second one, third one, fourth one. There's many cases where you won't read them on the first, second, third, fourth week if they're consecutive weeks. So it just means the first of the 4 parashiot, the second of the 4 parashiot. Bashniya, on the second one, when do we read? Shabbat. We read Zachor. Bashilishit, right? So sometimes Zachor is the second. Sometimes Zachor, as we said earlier, is going to be the third. Bashilishit, on the 3rd week, or the 3rd case of Shabbats, of Shabbat with the Arba Parashiot, we read Para Aduma. We read the laws of Para Aduma. Why are we reading on the 3rd week, which is usually going to be the week after Purim? Why are we reading Para Aduma? We'll see in just a second. The last week, which is Baravi'it, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, on the 4th week, which is Erev Rosh Chodesh of Pesach, we read HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is the story that they were told in advance of the Korban Pesach. B'chamishit Chosrin the Sidran. On the 5th week, we go back to a normal reading of the parashiot, which we have every Shabbat. Now, let's try and understand. If on the 4th week we're reading a Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is in preparation for the Korban Pesach, so it makes sense that on the 3rd week we're reading Parashat Para. Why? Because one of the things you have to be, in order to do the Korban Pesach, is to be pure. So therefore we're reading the process of purity on the 3rd week, so that gives you that chance to be able to get it done before you get to the Parasha of Pesach. And you're excluded from Pesach. All of us who remember, we have the story in the Torah of Pesach Sheni. What's Pesach Sheni all about? The fact that there were people that were impure. So perhaps if they had read Parashat Para the week before, they would be sorted. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Lachol Mafsiki. Anytime we have a hello.
First time, I think.
Oh, welcome. You're more than welcome to join us. Fadal. L'chol mafsikin. Anytime there's a holiday, mafsikin, we break the normal reading of the Shabbat and we move to the reading of that holiday. By the way, if you ever notice, there's times when in Israel and in America they'll be reading different parashiyot.
Yeah.
How's that possible? They keep one day, right? We keep 2 days. There'll be times when our second day falls out on Shabbat, which means that what did they read in Israel? When we were on Yom Tov, they read the regular parasha of the week. What did we read? We read the parasha of the holiday. So now we're one behind them. And that's why sometimes you could be months before you actually get back to being in sync with the people with Eretz Israel. But however, the Mishnah says, L'chol mafsikin. For every holiday, we pause the reading. B'Roshei Chodashim. We also, on Rosh Chodesh, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Monday, Thursday, we pause from the regular reading. What do? Insert? We insert the reading of Rosh Chodesh, like we did this morning. B'Chanukah, on Chanukah, we read the special readings of Chanukah, not the readings of Monday, Thursday. Ube Purim, same thing on Purim, we read a special reading of Purim, which is the reading of Amalek. Similar to the reason why we read Parashat Zachor the week prior to Purim. Remember we said Zachor is either read on the second week or on the third week, right? Either week 1 is going to be Shekalim, either the next week or 2 weeks later is Zachor. What's the reason for the difference? The reason is we want to read about Amalek right before we read the story of Purim. Because the story of Purim is the descendant, Haman Ha'agagi, who comes from the tribe of Amalek. Says the Mishnah continuing. B'Taniyot, on a Tanit, what do we read? We read the whole story of Moshe asking Hashem for forgiveness after the story of the Chet HaEgel. U'b'Ma'amadot, and as we read earlier, Ma'amadot refers to the times when the Jewish people would be staying in a specific place to be able to read their parashiyot. What did we discuss, if you remember? Every korban needs to have somebody standing over it that is the owner of that korban. So let's say I'm bringing a korban. I need to be there when they bring in the korban. What happens if it's a korban for the whole Jewish people? So who's there? All the Jewish people have to stand by that korban, which every korban for the community is a korban for the whole Jewish people. So how do we have all the Jews there? The answer is, the Kohanim and the Leviim, they're in the service, they're standing there. So we have representatives of the Kohanim, representatives of the Leviim, because they're part of the temple service. What about the Yisraelim? So the Jews were divided also into groups. Each part of the Jewish people was divided into groups, and each group had a time when they were the ones that were set aside to be standing for the korbanot. That's ma'amadot. The Jews the Yisraelim that were in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, they would go to the temple.
Groups by nation?
Groups by Kohen, Levi, Israel. So the Israel, let's say I'm this span. Right now, this time period is my period. If I live in Yerushalayim, what do? I actually go to the temple. If I can't go to the temple because I live in Deal, New Jersey, Manhattan, Flatbush, wherever I live, the halakha is you stay where you are. But the people who were doing ma'amadot, they would read special portions. If you remember what they would read from Bereshit, the whole week they would read this whole thing. So what do they do when it comes time for ma'amadot? The ma'amadot supersedes the regular parasha reading of the Monday, Thursday on their day. Ubi Yom HaKippurim, and also on Yom HaKippurim, there's a special reading. We read the reading of Yom Kippur when we take out the Torah on Yom Kippur. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Okay, quickly. So it says on Hanukkah you read Hanukkah, and on
Yeah.
you say Rosh Chodeshim. Why is it on Hanukkah and let's say during the week we have Rosh Chodesh on Hanukkah, we take out both Sefer Torah? Shouldn't that be also during the week as well? Do you get my question? Like, so we read Hanukkah and read Rosh Chodesh. During the week like today, we just read Rosh Chodesh.
Okay.
Why is it during Hanukkah read Parashat Hanukkah and Parashat Rosh Chodesh?
So that's a very good question. The answer is because these days they demand the reading because it's the day. So Kedushat Hayom demands the reading that's relevant to that day. Monday, Thursday was a takana.
Yeah,
what was the takana of Monday, Thursday, if you remember?
For not to spend 3 days.
Ezra Sofer said, I don't want the Jewish people going 3 days without having any Torah. So therefore they have Shabbat, they were already reading. But then Monday is 2 days after, they do Monday. Then 2 days after Monday is Thursday. Then 2 days after Thursday you have Shabbat. So they created a system where you never go without reading Shabbat. So Monday, Thursday is only if you have no Torah. So therefore Monday, Thursday gets pushed off for Chanukah, for Purim, for Yom Kippur. But if it's Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh, both days demand that I read about them. So therefore, Chanukah is not nidche from Rosh Chodesh, or vice versa. Therefore, I have to read both. But I don't read Monday, Thursday, and Chanukah on a regular day because the whole Monday, Thursday was in order to read. Now I'm reading anyway. So I have that. I fulfilled Takanat Ezra by the reading of Chanukah.
When was Takanat Ezra put into place?
Takanat Ezra HaSofer is at the time of the rebuilding of the Second Temple.
Okay.
So you're talking about roughly 2,500 years ago. That's how old that Takana is. Okay?
And bar mitzvahs? Because with bar mitzvahs always, now we do it Monday, Thursday. And
Bar mitzvahs is just that's the day that you take out the Torah.
right.
So since that's the day you take out the Torah, and then we want the kid to read, so then they would go up whenever they would go up, on the Shabbat or whatever.
So it didn't matter before.
No, it didn't matter before. There's also, by the way, this is something that people forget. There's no halakha that a bar mitzvah boy needs to read the Torah. You have some parents, they take a kid, the kid's dyslexic. They force him to read the whole parasha. It takes him 4.5 years, and then he makes every mistake in the book, and he feels like a loser, and that's how he celebrates his bar mitzvah. Those parents should be locked up. Or their rabbi should be locked up for not telling them that this is not a chiyuv. Let him read Shema and Shacharit, and that's good enough. Okay? Let's move on. Of course, someone should do it if they can. Let me be clear. But in a scenario where it's causing the kid pain, understand what's chiyuv, what's not chiyuv. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara now is operating on the Mishnah, and we're going to bring another Mishnah, Tenan Hatam. If you remember, we said this already a couple times before. Every time the Gemara says the word Tenan, Tenan is a Mishnah. Tanya is a Braita. What's the difference between a Mishnah and a Braita? The Mishnayot and the Braitot were both said by the Tanaim. But the Mishnayot were the ones that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi decided to incorporate in the corpus, in the body of Mishnayot. Braitot were just, so to speak, memrot that was said by different Tanaim. The Braitot also were not as refined and as reliable as the Mishnayot. Okay? Because they weren't, so to speak, double checked. They didn't get the double check guarantee of State Farm. Okay.
Do you have a process of determining what to include, what not to include?
Yes, you also have to remember that these were his contemporaries. So Rabbi Yehuda could have called the guy on the phone and been like, "Hey, Rabbi Meir, it says over here that you said this. Is that what you said?" They lived at the same time, like a lot of these Tanaim. So for us, it's like, how do you know the difference between this and this? We're looking at old scrolls. For him, he wasn't looking at scrolls. Nothing was written down. So this was what was given over from father to son, from rabbi to teacher, that this is what Rabbi Meir says, this is what Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had the privilege at the time of going to people that actually heard it come out of their mouth. He said, did he say it like this or did he say it like that? So he refined the Mishnah in compiling the Mishnah. Tenan Hatam says the Mishnah, Be'echad be'adar mashmin al shikalim. On the first day of Adar, we would tell everybody about the shikalim. Ve'al hakilayim. And also about the prohibition of growing two different things together. Bishlam ala kilayim, the Gemara says, 1 second. On kilayim, I understand. Disman zriyahu. Nisan, we know, is the time of spring. So when do you plant? You plant prior to spring. Because you want to make sure that by the time spring comes, everything is ready to go. So the water, everything, the growth, the sun, everything is perfectly aligned for the growth spurt season of the wheat and of the things. However, so that would be around Purim time. But ask the Gemara, ala shikalim, why on shikalim minalan? Why are we reading about shikalim? Why are we announcing it on the first day of Adar? Gemara answers, Amar Rab Tevi, Amar Rab Yoshia. Rab Tevi said, Rab Yoshia Amar Kara, Zot olat chodesh bechodsho. We bring the olah of the new moon. When do we bring it? On the chodesh. So, Amar Torah, chodesh. Chadesh vehave korban mitruma charasha. When you start a new month, we bring the new korban for that month from the truma charasha, from everything that was separated already from then. So therefore, what are we saying actually? That the new month is coming from the money that was already given. If that's the case, if we're not telling you which month that's referring to, so we learn from there that every single new korban tzibur needs to be brought from the new money. You can't use old money for a new korban. If that's the case, so what do we have to make sure that we have lots of in the communal coffers? Shekalim. The purpose of the shekalim was to be able to fund the korbanot tzibur, the sacrifices of the community. And in the time of the Mishkan, it was used not only for korbanot tzibur, it was also used for the adanim of the Mishkan. Yes?
How do you define old money with new money?
So last year's terumot should not be used for this new month's korban.
So what to do with it? It's like So last year's money, what did you do with it, Dave?
They would use it for Bedek Habayit, for other purposes of Bet HaMikdash. But they wouldn't use it for the Korban Tzibur.
Okay.
The keva de benisan bai ikruve mitruma charasha. Since in Nisan you have to bring a new korban from the truma charasha, kadminan v'karinan be'echad b'yar. Since Nisan is the new year, right? Remember, we relate to the new year in when Tishrei. But how does the Torah relate to the new year? What's Chodesh Harishon? Nisan. So since that first month is undefined, we're going to relate it already to the first month. If Nisan's korbanot need to be from New Levi, so when are you going to collect the shekalim? Prior to Nisan. What's the month prior to Nisan? Kadminan v'karina be'echad be'adar. We have the month of Adar to be able to collect that shekalim in order to get there, to be ready and prepared for the first of Nisan. Ki hechediletu shekalim le'mikdash. In order that the shekalim should get to the mikdash in time and they should be able to use it. Now, this Mishnah was not talking about the reading of Parashat Shekalim. It was talking about the Bet Din announcing, guys, mitzvah to bring the Shekalim. So by the way, I don't know if you notice, when we hit Rosh Chodesh Adar in the Bet Knesset, you start announcing Shekalim. We still do that today. We tell people, guys, Mahatzita Shekel on the thing. And for 2 weeks we're talking about it. Why are we doing that? Not because people are lazy. Not because we want to give people 2 weeks, not because we want to have a payment plan, not because someone's going to cancel whatever they get their subscription, whatever, and pay them for that money, because the original takana was to start announcing the Chiyuv Shekalim when? Rosh Chodesh Adar. So too, us, even though the guy has the opportunity to do it for 2 weeks, and you could just do it Erev Purim, still, we do it like they did it back then. Now that's all. Sorry?
That's why there's so many collectors today.
Probably because, they're in the zone. But this is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. We're a month early even for that. Right? In a non-leap year, this would be the day. Maybe they didn't get the memo. Okay? Now, says, this is all, what did we discuss up until now? The Hachrazah of the Bet Din. We've not talked about the reading of the Torah of Parashat Shekalim. Says the Gemara, so now, where do we get this idea that Shekalim is by 30 days? You just told me that you have to do it prior to Nisan. Maybe it's a week. Maybe 23 days into Adar, we should announce it. Who told you to go all the way back to Rosh Chodesh Adar, 30 days? Keman, who is this going according to? This is not according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rashbag used to say, Ha'amar, right? Ha'amar shte Shabbatot. He says that anything that you need to prepare for, 2 Shabbatot is enough, 2 weeks. Tanya, where do we learn that he holds that 2 weeks is enough prep? Shoalim bilchot Pesach kodem Pesach 30 yom. The halacha says, blanket rule, you need to prepare for Pesach korban, for the halachot of Pesach. How many days before do we start teaching halachot of Pesach? 30 days. That's what the Braita says. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no. Shte Shabbatot, 2 weeks, 14 days. So you see, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that prep time is not 30 days, prep time is 2 weeks. So therefore, if you're telling me to announce it 30 days before, it must be that the Mishnah is not going according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because if it was, what would it say? 2 weeks. The Gemara says, no, like I said to you earlier, we never like to exclude someone from the halacha party. If the halacha is X, and I find an opinion that says not like that, I don't want to say he's not like the halacha. We try to say the halacha could also go like him. Afilu tema, maybe you could say Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel also goes according to him, that we read this early. Kivan, the Amar Mar, since the Mishnah said, B'chamisha asar bo shulchanot yoshvim medina, since on the 15th day of the month, the money changers, the shulchaniot or the shulchanot, these people why do they call them shulchanot? Because they used to sit at a table to count out all the money and put the money in front of them, so it would be clear that they weren't cheating you. Okay, that it wasn't in their hand; they would put the money on the table. Okay, that's where the expression comes from: money on the table. And by the way, that's why the expression money on the table means that you trust that the money's there. Because the shulchanot, that's how they used to do it. They would put the money in front of you, and that's how you knew the money was there. So if you say you have a deal, and the guy's like, I have the money, they're like, okay, let's have the money on the table. That's what you actually are referring to. So the shulchanot would sit on the 15th day of the month. Yoshevin b'medina. They would sit in the province to be able to give people the ability to take their money and divide it into smaller amounts, because all you're supposed to give is mahatzita shekel. What does the pasuk say? Hada lo yamit, poor guy would not give less. Ha'ashir lo yaber, rich guy does not give more. You can't give a shekel and be like, yeah, do whatever, write it up, put it on my bill, give me for next year. Doesn't work that way. Everybody has to give the exact amount. You can't say, here's 4 shekel for me and my 7 children. It has to be that every person gives separately a half shekel coin. And on the 25th of Adar, they would come and they would give half shekels to all the people in the Beit HaMikdash. Mishum Shulchanot, since the money changes needed so much time to be able to make sure that every single Jewish person and their kids and their wife, everybody had a half a shekel, because everyone needs to give. Mishum Shulchanot kadmina v'karinan. Therefore, we went back earlier and we read for them 2 weeks earlier on the first day of the month of Adar, in order to be able to give them the opportunity to do their jobs, both in the province on the 15th day and on the 25th day in the Beit HaMikdash, so that we're present and accounted for prior to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so that we could buy the communal sacrifices from the money of that year. Let's continue. The Gemara says, "My parashat shekalim." What is this parashat shekalim that you refer to? Rav says, "Tzad bnei Yisrael v'natan et korbani lachmi liishai." You should command the Jewish people and tell them korbani lachmi liishai, which is what we read actually on Rosh Chodesh. Shmuel says, "Ki tisa." When you count the Jewish people, let them give half a shekel. Why does Rav say that? Because Rav is talking about the korban of the community. What did you use the shekel for? To buy that korban. Rav says, let's read the parasha portion that tells you about the thing that you're going to buy with the money. That's the purpose here. Shmuel says, no, let's read the part that tells you about collecting the money. So that's a machlok Rav and Shmuel. Who do we hold like actually? We hold like Shmuel. Gemara says, according to Shmuel, I understand because that's the counting. That's why you read that for Parashat Shekalim. Because it talks about the Shekalim. According to the opinion that says, Et korbani lachmi liishai. Why are you reading that now? Does it talk about the shekalim in that parasha? Gemara says, it does. Taimamai, what's the reason? Rav Tevi. Like we said earlier, according to the opinion of Tevi, that Rav Tevi said that is what you use, that Rav Tevi says that is what you use the money for the korban for. So since that's the money that the korban is used for, the shekalim is used for. So therefore, that's why it's called shekalim, because that's what the purpose of shekalim is for. Says the Gemara.
Rob doesn't account for inflation.
Sorry?
Rob doesn't account for inflation.
I would imagine that the money that the entire Jewish people would give was probably more than enough for that amount, for the korbanot zibur. And why do I say that? Because if you have to tell me a law that you can't use old money for new korbanot, what does that tell you? That there's extra left over, right? That's why the law has to come into effect. So I'd imagine that wasn't necessarily the problem. Yes?
Can I ask one question?
Yeah?
So if you measure it in silver, the value of silver throughout the last 4,000 years has been constant. It's other things that depreciate in value, but if you're talking about a certain number of grams of silver, it would keep its value throughout history.
So that is an excellent point, except that, like you correctly pointed out, the value of animals would fluctuate. The value of korban mincha would fluctuate. So flour would go up and down depending on famine. Animals would go up and down depending on famine and or siege. So the things you were buying with it would now, I think that's what Ray is saying. I don't know if you mean necessarily inflation in terms of the continued inflationary process of time, but in general, it would go up and down depending on supply and demand based on a variety of factors. Okay? By the way, also, I would imagine that the price of a sheep was very different in Nisan than it was in a random month. Why? Because comes Nisan and the whole Jewish people need to slaughter a sheep. Every single family. And when do they need to do it? On the second week of the month of Nisan. So even animals themselves in a specific calendar year with no external change, weather or otherwise, would probably be a rise and fall. But since we're referring to over here the entire year, probably we're counting in the entire bell curve, which is that on an average year, this is the amount that this would cost. The Gemara continues. Although, let me just say one other thing. We discovered in Masechet Ta'anit that there were times when the Beit HaMikdash was short and we had to go to certain families, remember that? And they had to top up the plate, what was missing. So you see from there that there was times when people needed to top up for various reasons. So you see, but as well, that the problem was solved by the generosity of the people around them. Says the Gemara, the Gemara now continues those two opinions. According to the Manda Amar that says, Tzav b'nei Yisrael, korban ilachmi, which is Rav, right? So that's the one that you're reading, Mishum dechtiv korbanot hatam. The reason why you're reading it then is because you have to bring the korbanot, and that actually turns out on the Rosh Chodesh. So the reading of Tzav, of Shekalim, on Rosh Chodesh actually fits really well. But according to the person that holds, Ki tisa korbanot miktivi, does it talk about the korbanot on that day, that you have to read that portion on that day, on Rosh Chodesh? Answer the Gemara, no. Shekalim la'adanim ktivi. What is it? The shekalim are read in the portion of the Torah. What did they use, as I mentioned to you earlier, what did they use the shekalim for in that initial raise in the Torah? That was for the adanim, which is the bases that held the planks of the wall of the Mishkan. So the big square cinder blocks of silver that they used across the bottom, that was made up of the melted silver coins of the Jewish people. So therefore, you have no connection to Korbanot and Rosh Chodesh Adar. So according to Shmuel, why would we read Parashat Shekalim on Rosh Chodesh? The Gemara continues and says, Kidetani Rav Yosef. According to Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef said, Shalosh Tirumoten. There are 3 different times that we gave Tirumah in the Torah. One is Shel Mizbeach LeMizbeach. When they gave for the Mizbeach, that was collecting for the Mizbeach, and there's one Tirumah. The second one is Shel Adanim LaAdanim. When you collected for Adanim, that was Adanim. V'Shel Bedek Habayit, the Bedek Habayit. And the last one was Bedek Habayit. Each time it says the word Tirumah, and each time it refers to something else. So how does that help us? So therefore, since there's a different reason for each one of these things, the Tirumah was used for multiple purposes. One of those purposes is related through Korbanot to Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara says, okay, I got you. Let's see if Shmuel and Rav are on the same page or something else. According to the opinion that says, Kitisa, which is Shmuel, that is what is different about this Rosh Chodesh from other Rosh Chodeshim, because on this Rosh Chodesh you're reading the parasha of Kitisa, Rosh Chodesh Adar, because it's Parashat Shekalim. But on every other Rosh Chodesh, what are you reading? According to Rav, there's no difference on Rosh Chodesh. So why is the Mishnah saying you read this on Rosh Chodesh Adar? That makes no sense. You read this on every Rosh Chodesh. That's the reading of Rosh Chodesh, the reading that we actually read this morning. Manda Amar, Tzav Korban Lachmi, my Shani, what's the difference? The Gemara says Shani, it is different. The Rosh Chodeshim, on Rosh Chodeshim Karushita Binyan Diyome. On a regular Rosh Chodesh, which falls out on Shabbat, what would you read? You would read with 6 people, because Shabbat demands the 6 people call to the Torah. And then you would read, as an example, the extra part of Rosh Chodesh. V'chad, and one person for Rosh Chodesh. So you read 6 in the parasha, second Torah you read, the 7th is going to be from Rosh Chodesh. But now, Vilu Ha'idna, Kulu b'de Rosh Chodesh. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbat, you read the whole portion of Rosh Chodesh. Now that's not what we hold, but hold on. Let's see what the Gemara says. Gemara says, 1 second. According to the opinion that says that we go back to the 4 parashiyot, that fits. According to the opinion that says that we go back to the Seder Haftarot, Uparshata di Yoma Karinan, which is what we actually hold. You read the parasha, and then you don't read that entire parasha, the whole of the reading of Shabbat, of the reading of Rosh Chodesh. Ma'ishani, there would be no difference between any other Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Chodesh Adar that turns out on Shabbat, which the Mishnah says you read Parashat Shekalim. The Gemara says no. Still, Shani, there's a difference. What's the difference? Dilu Rashi Chodashim Karushita Binyan Diyoma. On a regular Rosh Chodesh, you read 6 people in the regular parasha, and Vechad Dekari Rosh Chodesh, and the last one reads Rosh Chodesh. But on Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbat of Adar, which is Parashat Shekalim, Ha'idna karutlata binyan diyome. 3 people read from the regular reading, ve'arba karu bid Rosh Chodesh, and you read 4 more in Rosh Chodesh, which is how we normally read Rosh Chodesh during the week. Do we hold like this today? Still not. Says the Gemara. Metve, we ask, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechal Liot b'Shabbat, Korim Parashat Shekalim. You read Parashat Shekalim, Umaftirim b'Yehoyada HaKohen, and you read the Haftarah of Yehoyada HaKohen. If you're reading Kitisa, we understand. If you're reading Kitisa, then the reason why you're reading the parasha of Yehoyada, the Haftarah, what do we say about every Haftarah? It's supposed to match what we read. So if you're reading Kitisa, then the Haftarah of Yehoyada Kohen matches. Dedamile, because they're connected. Because Yehoyada also, Tichtiv Kesef Nefashot Erko, that they collected money for the value of each person. So you see as well, there's a tax on the people. According to the people at Korbani Lachmi, according to the people that say Korbani Lachmi, that you're reading Korbani Lachmi, which is, according to Rav, Mi Dami, what does Yehoyada, the Haftarah, have to do with Parashat Shekalim? They're not connected at all. The Gemara says, no, Dami, we find a similarity. What's a similarity? Kid Rav Tavi, according to Rav Tavi, that Rav Tavi already said that we use the half a shekel. What do we use it for? We use it for the purposes of korbanot and communal obligations. So that's the connection of Yoyada, that you're also using it for communal obligations. The Gemara now asks one more question. Metve, we ask in the Gemara, Chaliot b'parasha smuchala, if it falls out on the parasha, which is close to shekalim, Megilla, Metve says the Gemara, let's ask a question. Chaliot b'parasha. If falls out on the parasha simuchala, so the day that we were supposed to read shekalim, when did we say that was already? Remember?
We said the week before.
That's going to be, so when it falls out on Chaliot parasha, Shabbat falls out on Rosh Chodesh, so when do you read it? On that day, okay? So Chaliot b'parasha simuchala, if it falls out close to that portion, ben milifanea, ben me'acharea. So, whether it falls out before that or right after that, the halacha is kor'in ota v'choflin ota. They read the parasha of Shekalim and then they read it again. Why? Because the difference between these two things is actually very, very close. Think about it this way. Where are we now? We're up to parashat Va'era. Next week is Bo, after Bo Bishalach, after Bishalach Yitro, after Yitro Mishpatim, after Mishpatim Teruma, after Teruma Tetzaveh, then Kitisa. So we're 7 weeks from now. When is Purim going to be? From now. We have basically 4 weeks of Shivat that we just started, and then 2 weeks of Adar in a normal year, right? This year you don't have it because it's a leap year, so it's going to be another. But 6 to 7 weeks is very, very close. So the week of might come out right next to Kitisa, the week before or the week after. If that's the case, what do? Kor'in ota, you read Shekalim the first Shabbat, because that's Parashat Kitisa, or it's Shekalim, either one. V'choflin ota, and then you read it again. So there are times when you'll read Kitisa 2 weeks in a row. One because of Parashat Kitisa, and one because of Parashat Shekalim. So they might actually be identical. I remember one year, we did not have the Sefer Torah rolled to Parashat Shekalim. I was like, oh gosh, no one remembered to roll Parashat Shekalim. What was the Torah up to? Parashat Shekalim. So we didn't need to roll it anywhere. It was right there, right? So there was no cause for concern. Okay, so if that's the case, if we just read what we just read, the Gemara says, that Braita that says that you're going to read Shekalim 2 weeks in a row, that only makes sense according to Shmuel, who says that on Shekalim you read Kitisa. According to the opinion that says sometimes it can fall out in the same portion. According to Mandam that says that falls out at the end of Bamidbar. When would it ever be relevant? When would it ever happen that Parashat Pinchas, which is where Korbani Lachmi, would fall out next to Kitisa? They're so far away from each other. In the Torah, the Gemara says, it does happen when Lebnei Marava Dimaski L'Deoraita B'Tlat Shenin. It used to be, today we read every parasha is one. So we read this week's parasha, Va'era. Next week's parasha, Bo. But it used to be that they would finish the Torah, not in 1 year, which is what we do, Simchat Torah to Simchat Torah. They used to finish Torah once in 3 years. So it could be a scenario in a 3-year spread in Eretz Yisrael, which was that was how they read, that Parashat Pinchas would actually fall out because it would overlap years. right? So you'd have a scenario that Pinchas might be the week before or the week after Korbani Lachmi, so they would have a double Parashat Shekalim, and that would be what the Mishnah is talking about. So again, each time we're trying to
How do
prove.
you wait 3 years?
They would read Bereshit in 3 parts.
Okay.
The next week would be Noach, 3 parts. I think the Zoom died. Can anyone get us on the Zoom?
Yeah.
Nathan Lowe's calling. I know that's what it is. Okay. Because you said low battery. Okay.
Right.
Low battery. Okay. Let's get in there. In Betlachini. Now the Gemara says, okay, so we had a bunch of questions, a bunch of parries each time. A bunch of thrusts. Each time we tried to knock out either Rav or Shmuel, and each time we had a good answer to the problem. The Gemara says, okay, Tanya Kavate de Shmuel. Let's find the Braita according to Shmuel. Rosh Chodesh Adar shechal liot b'Shabbat. The Braita says, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbat, korim b'kitisa. It doesn't say we read Shekalim, which you could then argue and say it means kitisa or it means tzavet korbani lachmi liishai. What does it say? It says, right? It says korin kitisa umaftirim yoyada kohen. So it tells you that shekalim is kitisa, which is exactly the opinion of Shmuel. There's no wriggling out of. So this proves the opinion of Shmuel, and that indeed is the halacha that we read for Parashat Shekalim, Parashat Kitisa, and not Parashat Tzavet Korban Lachmi Liishai. Now the Gemara is going to talk about how we read on Rosh Chodesh Adar. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha used to say, Rosh Chodesh Adar shechal liot b'Shabbat. When Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbat, motzi'in shalosh torot v'korim bahen. You pull out 3 torot. 3 Sifrei Torah. Echad binyano shel yom. You read, the first one is the portion of that day, the Shabbat of that day. Ve'echad b'shel Rosh Chodesh, one of Rosh Chodesh. Ve'echad b'chitisa, and one which is Parashat Shekalim. Okay? I had a similar thing, just the opposite. My week that I read was Parashat HaChodesh, so that's the last one, the one right before Pesach. It was Parashat Vayikra, and it was Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. So I wound up having 3 Torahs for my Parashat Bar Mitzvah. Ve'echad b'kitisa, the Gemara says, ve'echad b'shel Rosh Chodesh, one for Rosh Chodesh, ve'echad b'kitisa, and one of Shekalim. The Gemara now continues, okay, a similar concept that we just read in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Ve'amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Rosh Chodesh Tevet shechal liot b'Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh Tevet. So this was Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is before shechal liot b'Shabbat, mevin shalosh torot v'korim behen. Also, echad b'yeno shel yom, the parasha of the week. V'echad b'Rosh Chodesh, which is Chodesh Tevet. V'echad b'Chanukah. Rosh Chodesh Tevet is in the middle of Chanukah every single year, because we start on the 25th of Kislev. 5 days in, we're still in the middle of Chanukah, which is 8 days. That's Rosh Chodesh Tevet. So you have the Shabbat of the week, you have the reading of Rosh Chodesh, and you have the reading of Chanukah. So now we have 2 opinions from Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, but each one of them really tells you the same thing. So why do you need 2 opinions of Rav Nafcha? The Gemara says we need both. Because if you only would have said the first one, which is Rosh Chodesh, the second one, Rosh Chodesh Tevet, Bahakam Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha only said it in this case. Maybe if it only would have said it over here, we would not have said what Rav Yitzchak Nafcha said in the first one, because the third Torah would not have been Kitisa. The third Torah would have been Tzav et bnei Yisrael korban lechmi liishai, the reading of the regular Rosh Chodesh. So why did Rav Yitzchak Nafcha tell you both of these? That's to prove that Rav Yitzchak Nafcha also holds like Shmuel, that reads the Amar Parashat Shekalim. What is it? Et korban lechmi b'shtei Torot sagi. That would be enough in 2 Torot, because Shekalim and Rosh Chodesh are the same. Remember, Rav holds that you read on Shekalim the same as Rosh Chodesh. So why would you need 3 Torahs? You'd only need 2. One for the Shabbat and one for the Rosh Chodesh, which is also Shekalim. So you'd only need 2 Torahs. The fact that Yitzchak Nafcha tells you that you need 3 Torahs illustrates that he holds like Kamash Malan, that he holds like Rav. The Gemara says, okay, good point. How about the other way? Let Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha only tell me about the first case. Then you know that he holds like Shmuel, but you also see what the practice is for Rosh Chodesh. He doesn't need to tell us what to do on Rosh Chodesh Tevet. The Gemara says, let him say when we don't need the other. The Gemara says, Chada Michlal Chavrita Itmar. You're right, we didn't need one. But once Rabbi Yitzchak was nafcha, was said over only the first one, the Gemara already went on and said, from that one, we say the second one, okay? So therefore, we are finished with that opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha, and we hold like Shemuel, and we'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem from here. We'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem next week. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.